Hello, everyone. We're back.
Okay, great.
All right, here we are.
I'm back here.
So this is 24 Hours of UX and UX Geneva coming to you, bringing systems thinking and systemic design. So a brief intro. Some of you might have been here for a couple of hours, so you know the drill, but this is 24 Hours of UX, which means it's a non-stop conference where every hour is hosted by a different grassroots community somewhere in the world. And this hour is hosted by Geneva in Switzerland. And this is the whole idea, that it's the whole conference consists of grassroots groups that come from all over the world instead of a central committee, because we really want the sort of local aspect of UX and of design to come and shine. And the interaction possibilities that you have are not endless, but there's a lot. So you can comment on the right in the chat. You can write some thoughts in the Q&A, also on the right. You can write questions during the talk, and we will get to answering them. This talk specifically is quite interactive, so there will be a longer Q&A section. And we're also happy to bring you on the screen, on the stage with us for the Q&A. So if you want to do that, you can raise your hand near the end of the talk, and then we'll pull you on the stage so you can ask your question here. Apart from that, we have talks before this talk, and we will have talks after this talk as well. So, this is just one of many, but I promise you it'll be an interesting one. And with that, I will want to introduce to you Arash Golnam. Arash teaches at various universities in Switzerland. He comes from an engineering background, but has went through various topics, and he worked in system dynamics and has been mostly teaching around systems thinking and service design in the past years. And he'll do a bit deeper introduction to himself and the topic that he'll be talking around. But knowing the content that he usually brings, it's partly controversial and will partly also make you rethink some of the beliefs that you've been holding. So with that, Arash, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone, wherever you are. I hope you're well. Thanks for joining this session. I am Arash Golnam, and I'm connecting to you from the Swiss Alps. So I'm in a village right now in the heart of Switzerland called Evolen. And I'll be talking to you about one of the topics that I'm most passionate about, which is systems thinking and design thinking combined. So I hope you see my screen now, and if that is the case, I will just start my presentation. So today we'll talk about, sorry, Peter?
I would just say we see everything clearly, so do go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So the talk today is about systems design and systemic design. We're going to look at these disciplines together with some examples, and I will leave at least 20 minutes at the end of the talk for questions and answers and for some interaction. A quick overview of my journey. I've gone through engineering. I've been an industrial engineer, and then I came to Switzerland and I pursued my doctorate at the intersection between engineering and management. I was always passionate about systems thinking, so it was the topic that I chose for my dissertation and master's projects that I did throughout my studies. And then at some point, I decided to go more into the mathematical dimensions of systems thinking, which is a field called system dynamics. So it's a mathematical simulation of complex and adaptive systems. And I worked in the industry in some system dynamics projects, which were for urban dynamics, understanding the, let's say, city as a system of systems, and also the causes for disruptions and delays in large-scale projects. But at some point, I was disappointed with the limitations that the mathematical approach has when it comes especially to understanding human beings. So some aspects of humans cannot be rendered algorithmically or mathematically. And that put me on a different path. And I I've been exploring psychoanalysis for nearly 2 years, and I start my practice as a Jungian psychoanalyst this summer. So what I'm going to be presenting today here for you is multidisciplinary approach to understanding systems and to understanding design, and the combination of systems thinking and design, which is systemic design. It's a new paradigm that many are talking about it right now. And I'm a lecturer, consultant, educator, and recently I've started an initiative which is called Design Dissolve, in which we look at an alternative approach to design education. At the end of this presentation, I'll also briefly talk about what we do in Design Dissolve and how we want to create a difference when it comes to knowing more about this new paradigm of design as a multidisciplinary undertaking. Now, once we want to start about talk about systems thinking, we need to understand systems, what a system is. So first, I give you a semantic space for the word system. You know, if you look at system, you can find it in, let's say, close proximity with some other words like synthesis, synergy, symbol. Each of these words are about a moment when things come together and create something bigger. So there's always this dimension of coming together or pointing to something which is bigger or which is transcendent. For instance, analysis means you take a system and you break it down to its constituent elements. Like, for instance, you look at a car and then you break this car down into its constituent elements, to its axle, to its engine, gearbox, all the nuts and bolts and so on and so forth. Synergy is when a number of people come together and, for instance, can create something which is bigger than each of them could create individually. And synthesis, which I forgot to tell you, synthesis is when you look at a system, instead of breaking it down to its constituent elements, you want to locate it in a bigger scheme of things. Like, for instance, okay, now this is a car. Now this car needs to go on streets. This car probably pollutes the air. This car helps in transportation in such and such ways. It can create traffic. So you look at it in an intersection or in conjunction with other systems. It can be used for entertainment. It could be used for sports and so on and so forth. So this is synthesis, when you zoom out of that system and you see that system in interaction with other systems. Energy and synergy, I just told you about this, which is when you talk about synergy, what is happening is that you basically look at things in a way that they can result in let's say, they can create a level of results that they cannot achieve at the level of the individual components. For sign and symbol, you know, signs are designed in a way that they give only one connotation about a situation, like a no smoking sign. No matter where you see it, when you see it, it should give you that meaning that smoking is not allowed. But symbols, on the other hand, they allow for multiple interpretations. They allow for somehow an understanding of a phenomenon that is mysterious, and we try to understand that by means of symbols. So you see, there's this space of coming together, creating something, interconnectivity, and at the same time mystery. When you talk about words that start with SY, and the word system is not an exception here. Now, one definition of system that I like is basically from the book by Geoffrey West called Scale. It says that the system is composed of individual constituents or agents that, once aggregated, take on a collective characteristics that are usually not manifested in, nor could easily be predicted from the properties of the individual components themselves. So this is very profound. It means when we are talking about the systemic level, we are not talking about the parts anymore. So we lose touch with the parts. We lose sight of parts. Now they take a collective characteristics, these parts. But then we cannot say which part of this characteristic comes from which part. So there's something alchemical going on when you talk about systems. It's they create this systemic effect. Something is created at the level of the whole, not at the level of the parts, which cannot be traced back to the parts anymore. And this basically can also be called emergence. So when you talk about systems, there's a key notion of emergence that is at play. We have examples of emergence in nature. You know, the starlings, the flight of the starlings. You've seen videos of birds flocking together and creating these elegant patterns when they're flying. So this is an emergent behavior. So this is not something that is designed to happen. There is no one leading the birds to create something like that. It's something that is emergent as a result of basic rules that are being followed by the birds. When you talk about, for instance, water as a substance, water has got molecules of gas, and neither oxygen nor hydrogen have liquid properties, but they come together, bang, something happens that does not have any property of a gas. So that's also an emergence. This liquid, let's say, phase cannot be attributed to any of the constituent elements of the water molecules. And then we have patterns of spirals and fractals in nature. None of these are basically designed to be like this. They are actually emerging as a result of some natural processes that are happening. We can see emergences in art. You know, one of these frames is a painting by Jackson Pollock, but the rest are fractal shapes that are in nature. So we can see bushes and patterns of branches and seaweed and so on and so forth. But the pattern here that we have in the middle left is actually a painting that has followed a fractal design, which is in an emergent way. This painting has been created as a result of Jackson Pollock following a number of probably implicit rules and heuristics for generation of this painting. So we can see it in art. We can see it in also all sorts of paintings, that there is a pattern. That if, for instance, you look at an image and this image gives you a certain serenity or calmness or a sense of harmony, this sense of harmony is an emergent property of the, let's say, equilibrium that exists between the different forces that compose this painting. We can see it there. We can see it in artifacts that are created, in architecture in particular. This designing for emergence is something which is very well developed. This is a passage from a book called Timeless Way of Building, in which the author talks about the patterns that are timeless for design. He says that these patterns set us free. They let our inner forces loose. So that's the fact that, for instance, you enter a room and you feel calm, or you fall asleep under the shadow of a tree in a courtyard. This is an emergent property of the design of that room. It results in an experience which cannot be attributed to one single element of that design. It's the result of all the elements in interaction that create that effect. So it gives the example of a room that is designed in a way that the sitting area is also close to where the light comes in, and says this design results in a resolution of the tensions. But if you put the window somewhere in one corner and the chairs in the sitting area in another, this probably creates an inner conflict within us. So why am I talking about this? So if you want to have systemic design, there has to be an experience of emergence. There has to be emergence by design. So you have to design for emergence. And when you talk about a product or a service, if you look at this paradigm of designing for emergence, this product or service, the experience that the users have, will not be at the level of the features, will be at the level of the product or the service as a whole. So if you ask them, what did you specifically like about that experience? They probably cannot pinpoint one or two aspects of the service they have experienced or they have interacted with. It's probably something that they experience as a whole. The example I always give is an instrument that I have right behind me here in this room. So the result of my interaction with this guitar is that I cannot put it down once I take it up, and it just channels a lot of my creativity. Basically, it makes me more creative, and it gives me a feeling of time flowing very quickly. And all these are emergent properties of the design of this instrument. And I cannot pinpoint one aspect of the guitar. I can't say it's the fretboard, it's basically the weight of the guitar, the material that is used, or so on and so forth. So the service or the product is experienced as a whole when there is emergence happening. You cannot go back. The vocabulary of the user will not be at the level of the components, will be at the level of the service as a whole. The other principle for emergence by design that I have noticed throughout my work is basically this is a heuristics-based design initiative, which means you play around with a number of variables, number of ideas, one part of the system, and at the other part, at the other end, something emerges as an experience for the users. One example I can give you is from my courses. Whenever I design a course, I don't have some sort of very clear-cut objectives at the in mind for the end of the course, but I have a number of visions. The visions I have in mind is I want to create a magical space, a magical learning experience, something that is transformative. I want to create a learning space in which the individuals let loose of their forces and they feel at home. They feel some sort of a mysterious familiarity of knowing this stuff from somewhere. So these are the ideas I have. And this is what I want to achieve, more in form of a vision. So I don't want to boil it down into a number of clear-cut objectives. This is the vision I have in mind. And I want to experience, for instance, a feeling of resonance between the course and the individual participations that are in the course. So that resonates. We see this flow that individuals say, well, I didn't even notice the time passing, or the 6 weeks or the 8 weeks passed so quickly, and so on and so forth. This is what I want to do. But then to create this, I have come to an understanding of a certain number of heuristics that I should use. For instance, I always think if the course is not challenging me, if I'm not being challenged in this course, that space is not going to be created. That experience is not going to be created. So I always try to bring new ideas into the course, to read and to learn at the same time with the students. So I cannot really say how this influences that, but I know it does. The other idea about some of the heuristics that I use is that I always try to put students in contact with material that are timeless, things that have existed for decades and they're still valid. So this type of material also contributes to a unique learning experience for the individuals. That's something else that I know. So I try to stay away from the fads or the trendy topics that exist. I always try to ground myself in something which is fundamental and meaningful and timeless. So this is another example of the heuristics that we have, and the type of design that we are thinking here is not something that is very clearly linked. You can't say that this exactly creates that effect through this mechanism, but it's heuristic. That's why it's heuristic based. And lastly, I think whenever we are in touch with something that a service or a product that we experienced at the level of whole, and we experience an emergence with that service or product, this emergence happens in our body. So it's corporeal before it's intellectual. So whenever you have an experience of having goosebumps, for instance, that shows that there is something happening in an emergent way. You are in touch with something wholesome. So the idea that our body responds to things faster than our intellect also appeals to me a lot, because I think body, or the intuition that is embodied within us, sees things as a whole. It doesn't break them down into its individual components. Another example I can give to you here is a service that has an emergent property is a joke. Whenever we hear a joke, we start laughing if it's a good joke. But if we don't, no matter how well a person explains why that joke is a funny joke, we will never laugh. So it's as if our body responds to that quickly than our intellect. And if we want to intellectualize the merit of a joke, it's never going to work anymore. So we need to connect to it at the level of the whole. I also believe that a lot of experiences that we have when it comes to soft skills need to be created. Those skills need to be created through designing for emergence. So I don't think anyone can become a leader by going through some PowerPoint presentation. They should experience situations in which some specific leadership skills will be targeted and developed. So some ideas about emergence and designing for emergence, which I think is a key notion of systems and systemic design. So some questions for you to ponder over. What emergences do you experience on a daily basis? When is it that you have an experience, you find it an incredible experience, but you cannot boil it down to one or two elements? You can't say what exactly was about it that was incredible. If you watch a movie and then you're amazed by it, you're enthusiastic about it, and you cannot say what exactly was there that was basically creating this or contributing to this enthusiasm inside you. How can we design for emergences? Do you design for emergent experiences for others? How do you do that? So maybe the first point we can start with is actually somehow recalling our own emergent experiences, and then we think about if we have designed something for emergence. How can we understand the users from a phenomenological perspective? So what we need to do as designers is to understand the various forms of emergences that the service creates for our users. And these are not things that we have in mind. These are not value propositions as we name them. This is those type of perceptions, affects, feelings, and let's say everything that is not about the service, but it's about the user's interaction with the service. What happens as a result of the interaction between the service and the user is the phenomenology of the service, is basically understanding it from the point of view of the users, how they feel about it, what goes on inside them. Not talking about the features or the stages of the service or the journey of the user, or which part of the journey that the user is at what are the touch points, or so on and so forth, but understanding it purely from the user's point of view and looking for some sort of emergences that happen in the users. This way we need to acknowledge the uniqueness of the users and understand the subjective experiences, the subjective affects, feeling tone reactions, and the perceptions that are generated for them through the service. So this is the first part. This is some ideas about around the word system. Now, if you go to design, we have some other words that are sharing the same root. We have signification in French, which means meaning, significance or importance, and signature and design. So there's this dimension of adding meaning or significance there. So there is something very human about design. So meaning and significance, attribution of meaning, driving importance and significance from a service. Now, when we want to deal with this dimension, we need to basically look at services through the lens of human activity systems, which basically means we cannot have the engineering or natural, let's say, perspective. A lot of the tools we're using in designing services come from that paradigm. It's all about basically the flow of a user, exactly like the flow of a product in a production line. If you talk about, for instance, customer journey maps, how an individual goes through a number of stages. If you look at the blueprints, again, it's always about the technical components, all about technical components of it's as if we are designing an engineering component, and the word blueprint itself comes from that world as well. So human activity systems deals with perception of human beings. So human beings are free to attribute a variety of meanings and to observe things differently, to attribute meaning to their observation, and so on and so forth. So we need to embrace the fact that dealing with human beings is different from dealing with, let's say, a mechanistic system in which things can be testable, in which things can be basically defined as a number of KPIs, easily measured, and so on and so forth. There is a uniqueness in the interactions. And when it comes to the human beings, we all have sets of assumptions that work as operating principles for the observations that we make and for attribution of meanings to our observations. So the other thing that comes into play is that these assumptions need to be continuously updated. So here, David Bohm, in his book on dialogue, talks a lot about these assumptions. And whenever we are looking at something, it's the assumptions that are looking at that thing. And assumptions and our assumptions are sometimes not looked at. Assumptions are looking. Then what we see is the result of that lens that the assumptions create in front of our eyes. And how we react to what we see is basically going to be, again, an information input that comes into those assumptions and is projected in the world outward. So basically, there is a way we look at the world, and the way we look at the world determines what we see, and what we see gives us information that is then again processed in light of the assumptions or the worldviews that we have. And this creates an emotional reaction, which is then perceived. So there's a loop here. There's a feedback loop. But this feedback loop sometimes is just a single loop, which means the assumptions are never looked at. We need to convert this into a double loop learning, in which through each act of observation and attribution of meaning, we also update our assumptions, our worldviews, and our mental models. So this is crucial. So for designers and for users. So it's not just that we say people have different worldviews. It's also the fact that these worldviews need to be transcended, need to be updated, refined, and fine-tuned with the experiences that we have. And Gregory Bateson also talks about the major problems that we have is because of this discrepancy between the way we think and the way the nature works. So right now we have all these problems with pollution, global warming that we are experiencing, and so on and so forth. So there is a difference in the way we look at things and the way things work. When you talk about design, when you talk about creating significance and meaning, we need to look at our assumptions, we need to look at the way we think and update those continuously. And again, one other idea that we have here from a book that may not look like a book that is insightful for the world of design or systems thinking, but it is very much so, based on my experience of reading it. So it's the author of the book, The Art of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. It says that the factory is torn down, but the rationality with which it was produced is left standing, then that rationality will simply produce another factory. The same thing about a government. If a government is brought down, but the systematic patterns of thought that created that produced that government are left intact, again, they will enact another government, which is the same nature. So when it comes to design, there is this idea about worldviews, assumptions, the way people attribute meaning and significance, and where do those assumptions come from? Where do those worldviews come from? Are they cast in concrete? Are they dynamic for designers and for users? And you'll see in a second why that is an important point. So some questions here. How designing can result in a deeper understanding of the human conditions of the users and designers. So every act of designing should get us closer to an understanding of the human conditions of users and designers. How can designing become an odyssey of transforming worldview and mental models of users and designers? So if you're thinking about significance or meaning, then through the act of design, this meaning and significance needs to be created. So there has to be some sort of updating of worldviews, of mental models of individuals that takes place for designers and for users. And now if you put these two things together, so on the left side, we talked about the world of system. On the right side, we talked about the design. So now we are familiar a little bit about the semantic spaces of these two worlds. If we put them together, we can have two things. We can have systematic design, or we can have systemic design. Now, what is the difference? There's a very important difference as far as I'm concerned. When we talk about systematic design, it's following an orderly sequence of activities, usually in a linear way, aimed at solving a problem. This is more suitable for the mechanistic paradigm. And the patterns that we have here, we always start with a problem, then we try to build different, let's say, ideate around it, build different prototypes and test them and then put them out there. So the way it happens, the way this thing happens, we do not see emergences. We do not see basically creation of meaning or significance the way we talked about it. So there is this human dimension that is lacking. Now, systemic design, on the other hand, does not deal with solving a problem. It deals with dissolving a problem. So by dissolving a problem, we mean to redesign the system that has the problem so that the problem disappears. The problem does not exist. So the task of a designer is not problem solving, is basically dissolving the problems by redesigning the system that has the problem so that the problem does not exist anymore. So Russell Lakoff gives an example of a company that had very low level of productivity. So there was a paper company. They looked at the machinery and then they realized that, well, everything is working at the maximum productivity possible, but they're still not making use of a lot of their resources. And what they realized was that the problem there was that there were a wide variety of different types or variants of paper they needed to produce. And these variants required some setup time whenever they want to set the production line up so that it can basically that product can be produced. And these setup times, calibration of the machines, and so on and so forth was taking a lot of time. But there were contracts that were brought by the salespeople. So what they decided to do is that instead of giving commissions to the salespeople for the volume of the contract, we should give commission to the salespeople for the profit margin that the contract brings. And that resulted of many of those variants disappearing. And therefore, the production line was becoming more and more productive. So this problem could have been approached purely from, let's say, a mechanistic way of, okay, now we're facing an efficiency maximization problem. How do we tackle this? Maybe some probably addition of some automatic machines, some robots, some basically squeezing in some time out of, for instance, the workers' rest time or things like that could have resulted in increase in efficiency. But this could not have solved, let's say, have resulted in the basically results they had in mind, which was increase in overall productivity. And the problem was lying somewhere else. It was in the motivations of the humans. So once they went there, somewhere completely disparate from the production facility itself, they found out that if they work on motivating the individuals in a way that they move towards aggregating different orders into one and reducing the number of variants, that could solve the problem. So this is a redesign that happened in which the problem no longer existed. If you wanted to solve that problem, that would have been an endless struggle. Another idea here is that for design, we need to offer an opportunity to create a new system. So we need to transcend the existing system or to create a different system. So the task of a designer is not basically solving problems within the confines of the existing system. It's basically creation of a different system. So there's a lot of creativity that should exist in design. And finally, some ideas around the problems itself. So how can we produce solutions if problems remain unquestioned? So not only we should question problems to see where they come from and if they can be dissolved, but also the perspective or the worldviews from which these problems are generated need to be basically questioned. I give you an example again from the education industry with which I'm very familiar. With COVID, some of the traditional way of evaluating the students or examination could not work anymore. For instance, now that the students are home, professors could not give them multiple choice questions, which, believe it or not, is still happening in many universities. Some final exams are still happening in form of multiple choice questions. So there was a discussion in the faculty meeting around what can we do now about this, the fact that we can't do this. And there was a problem. The teacher wanted to give an exam that was composed of multiple choice questions, but this cannot be given anymore because students could simply check the basically correct answers. Responses are available on the internet. Only it could happen if they were sitting in a room and supervised by a number of people so that they were not touching any electronic devices or not talking amongst themselves. So one solution that was offered was, okay, we can contract this company that's going to lock the students' screens, and so that they cannot open some other browsers or whatever. That was problem solving in this case. But solving the problem would look like, all right, how do we redesign a system of examination in which we can give the questions to the students even a day before the exam, and they have the chance to go and think about it and respond to the question, and still it's a very valid way of evaluating what they have learned. So in order to do that, the whole of basically design of learning should change. So then you have to go into a different path when it comes to generation of a course that can be evaluated in that way. So that is the type of, I would say, initiatives that can be labeled as systemic design. All right, how do we redesign a course so that at the end of which we can give the questions to the students beforehand, and they have the time to consult anyone, talk to anybody, to Google anything they want, but still their evaluation remains valid. So what we believe, what I believe in Design Dissolve, and what we're doing is that there needs to be this transcendence. There needs to be this creative reaching out of and beyond the boundaries of an existing system, in an attempt to devise an order that embodies our vision of an ideal. So it's not a specific thing that we are looking at. It's a vision of an ideal that we have in mind. And we need to reach out and beyond the boundaries of the system that we currently have. Some final words for you. This creative reaching out of and beyond, you can see it in some of the design initiatives in Amazon. And they say that sometimes you know what you're doing in business and you know where you're going. And then in that case, you can be efficient. You can plan something, you can control things and achieve a good level of efficiency. In contrast, they say there is sometimes wandering in business. You have to wander. And it's not random, though. It is guided. It's guided by intuition and curiosity and powered by a deep conviction. So sometimes you need to wander. You should just be creative, imaginative, have visions of ideals, come and then try to see if there's a way you can create that, which does not entail being within the confines of the existing system. So wandering based on them is an essential counterbalance to efficiency. And that is where the outsized discoveries come from, the nonlinear ones, the ones that are basically, we can call them radical innovation type of basically initiatives or products or services. They come from the space of wandering. We see wandering in mythology a lot. Jung talks about wandering. We have in mythology the wanderings of Gilgamesh. If you're familiar with the myth of Gilgamesh, after he lost his friend Enkidu, he went and he wandered around. So this notion of wandering that they are talking about here is something which is essential. But to understand it better, we need to understand the world of intuition. And we give some room for intuition to emerge in the act of designing. So we have two worlds, basically. We talk about our psyche. Our psyche is in contact with two different worlds. We have a world of outer objects. This is basically a car, a molecule, a baseball bat, a course, a computer. These are all outer objects. And then we have the world of inner objects. These are visions, ideals, ideas, dreams, aspirations, right? These things that out of nowhere come to us. And in design, we need to bring a balance between utilization of these two worlds, the world of inner versus the outer objects. Inner objects is all about intuition, gut, hunch, and this wandering. Outer objects is about precise measurements. So in my opinion, we need to balance this space of design a little bit so that we are also looking at the inner objects, intuition, we're looking at feelings and so on and so forth. And this leads me to the final thing I have to share with you, which is the program we're offering in Design Dissolve, which is built on that purpose. We are basically offering a program with the idea of exploring and expanding our human potential. And this human potential is thinking. It involves thinking, but all different types of thinking, not only analytical thinking, can be lateral, feedback, holistic, synthetic, systems thinking. So we explore the space of thinking, and then we explore the space of all the functions of our consciousness that also entail intuition, feeling, and sensation. So thinking is only one of the functions. And the type of thinking that we have explored in our education is mainly analytical thinking, the type of thinking that breaks things down. And finally, there's unconscious processes that are sources of creativity within us. So we also need to tap into their potential in design. It's not only our conscious mind that is our ally in design. It's also the unconscious forces that are home to a lot of creative potential. So based on this, we have designed a program in which we have different foundations. We have a foundation of systems thinking that explores different modes of thinking, a foundation of design beyond thinking, which goes into different ideas of around the functions of our consciousness, how to use intuition, feeling, and sensation. And finally, we have disciplined imagination, which is exploring our unconscious processes and potential. And we will be happy to have you in this program. We currently have participants from 20 countries, all the 6 continents that have taken our program. Are still is an evolving program, so it's still in the process of evolution. So in this program, we are trying to basically respect the uniqueness of design situations, try to get more in touch with the human potential that needs to be present in design, building on intuition, our feelings, exploring the space of thinking, bringing on some elements from different disciplines into the sphere of design. And this is a program that I'm very excited and passionate about. And I'll be very happy to answer questions that you have about the program or about the presentation now that we have about 15 minutes left. So I thank you for your attention. And I'm here to answer your questions.
That is perfect. Thank you very much, Arash. Getting a lot of claps and thumbs up. There's a couple of questions. And let me quickly list them. There's one that got a lot of upvotes asking, how do we put systemic design into practice, especially while working with products and services that hypothetically had a lot of problems? So start from ground zero. Is systemic design even the right approach for digital products and services? And if so, where should we start?
Well, one thing about systems thinking is that it's about the big picture, but you need to be very concrete, you know? So many people think that systems thinking, because it's about the big picture view, it's also abstract, but it's not. So the best way to understand things is to talk about a specific context. So what those products are, right? What type of problems are there? And how are we tackling those? So one exercise you could do, you know, bring in a bit of systems ideas into, let's say, the sphere of design, is looking at key dimensions of that product or service over time. Okay, so if you think there's a problem, first of all, define it in a better way. Problem for whom exactly? Because problems are abstract abstract extractions of situations based on a point of view. So who exactly is experiencing the problem? Is it a specific segment of the customers that are experiencing that problem, and how has it evolved over time? What exactly do we mean by the problem? Because, like I said, problems depend upon the point of view of the onlooker, the person who is looking at a situation. If you have a background in marketing and you look at a situation, most probably you're going to see a marketing problem in that situation that is not functioning well. So beginning point of problem is not something that that appeals to a systemic analysis, because there's already a lot of narrowing down there. So you have to talk about problematic situations. So if this is a problematic situation, who are involved in this situation? How does this problematic situation manifest for them? How has it been manifesting over time for them? So probably you can start asking this question, ask people to create a very simple behavior over time graph, asking them, okay, how do you think this problem or this problematic dimension has evolved over time? Has it been are we doing better in that dimension, or doing worse, or so on and so forth? So you can, by bringing in some tracking and tracing of variables over time, you can already do a lot by understanding what exactly you mean by a problem, because problem is a difference or a discrepancy between a desired situation and an actual situation as viewed from the point of view of a single participant or a single stakeholder. So understanding this from lenses of multiple people could also be a multifaceted way of looking at things that could contribute to a more systemic way of analyzing this situation.
Perfect. Thank you. There is a question that got a lot of upvotes. Isn't emergence by definition kind of impossible to design for? How do you know what will actually emerge?
Yeah, that's great. Emergence, that I fully agree. Yeah, if you're talking about emergence, and if you say this is what I want to emerge, then there is no emergence. So this will be a paradox. So, but what you could do is that you characterize a space, a vision of an ideal. You know, you can say that I want to have a course which is memorable and transformative, for instance. You know, I want to have something that stays in the memory of individuals. How is it done? What aspect of it? What exactly this this means? That is not nailed down. So when you talk about emergences, it's not about KPIs. It's not about specific expectations. It's more about visions that you have of an ideal space, something in that in that neighborhood you want to happen. But there's always an element of surprise in it. For instance, one thing I never designed for in my courses, and almost always happens, is that there is a high degree of intimacy between individuals who take the course that emerges. So throughout the course, once they go through this learning, and my hypothesis is that when you're in contact with something which is wholesome, it generates that level of closeness between the people. I never designed for that, but almost always I see after the course, people want to stay in contact with one another, continue the conversation, and so on and so forth. So that's very true. And that's why I said it's a mystical idea. There's a bit of mysticism there, that you want something to happen. You want some magic to be created, but you do not specifically delineate that or describe it in terms of very clear-cut objectives at the end. I hope that helped with the question.
Thank you. There's also a lot of people asking if the recording will be made available. So the recording will be hosted on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/24hoursofux. I posted this in the chat, so you can follow the channel, and we'll also, of course, share an email. And I believe we'll share this with Arash as well, and he'll be able to share it on the Solved Design and also his other properties. Looking at another question, I'll take an easy one. Are meditation or music part of the program, or walking in nature?
Very good. Absolutely. Whoever asked that question has a good idea about creating emergences or understanding systems. Basically, I believe if we want to generate something which is meaningful, significant, inspiring for others, we need to be in contact with something which is wholesome. Like I said, nature is one of those. Art is one of those. Art is basically, we can say, is an extension of nature. So what we do is that instead of going and talking about all these trendy, let's say, buzzwords that are appearing nowadays in the world of design and the tools that or templates that exist, we want to have contact with something which is more timeless. And this timelessness, we bring some elements of mythology into the courses. We bring some elements of art. We bring some elements of poetry, and through that, we can generate a prospect, a worldview that is multidisciplinary, at the same time is grounded in something fundamental. I think more and more we are experiencing a system of education that is fragmented, and we experience it in fragments and silos. We need to go back to those fundamental things that give us perspective, that give us a ground to stand on, and give us the ability to carry insight from one context to another. So I'm all for context neutral type of techniques, knowledge, or wisdom, because it shows that you're in contact with something which is basically very elementary, at the same time very universal and very fundamental. So absolutely, we have a lot of
that was my question. Guilty as charged. That was my question. Because I've experienced it. I grew up playing the violin. Beethoven composed all his symphonies while he walked around in nature. Goethe wrote poetry walking. I mean, these ideas and creative things come to your mind when you're least expecting them. And sometimes the mind needs some distraction or some focus on something else in order to work on another piece. So thank you for your answer.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
And a quick thing before we continue. So we're near the top of the hour. I don't know, Arash, if you can stay a bit longer to answer some of the remaining questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. For the others, you can, of course, leave as well. So there's there's another session beginning about product design from UX Budapest, design team structures and digital product companies. And there's another one that looks at maybe a bit similar topic, curiosity and information architecture. So both are happening. If you go back to the schedule, then you should find these as upcoming sessions. And if you're leaving now, then thank you very much for your attention. As mentioned, the video will be shared on YouTube, and you'll be able to, and we will send a mail about this as well. And for those who stay here, I'll continue with the next question. So in your experience, how have systems thinking helped you create a better UX in the real world commercially? What would you say the advantages of applying systems thinking principles in user experience design are?
Well, I would say a good designer is a great learner. So, and systems thinking has been my gateway for learning how to learn, basically. Just in one sentence, if I can answer that question, is that systems thinking gives you a framework that helps you with learning how to learn. And this is going to be the most important skill that we need in future. So I would say, yeah, then you can derive insights from the least expected places, because you will have the ability to connect the dots, to see things that you couldn't otherwise see. So systems thinking is all about finding meaningful connections between seemingly different phenomena. A phenomenon that at first sight looks totally different from what you are doing right now in the field of UX or the experience you want to design. But then, thanks to systems thinking, and insight emerges and say, oh my God, this is basically the same thing in a different context, and you can learn from it. So once you're a systems thinker, then you can see things differently. You can connect things. You can learn better. You don't reject ideas very easily. You want to go into them to see if there is an opportunity for learning, an opportunity for transformation. So that is how I would say systems thinking enables us with the ability to learn how to learn, the ability to think about the way we think, to refine our thought patterns continuously. This idea of looking at our assumptions, our worldviews to see what they result in. So following this thread of what type of patterns of thoughts and ideas are generated through our assumptions and mental models is this task of a systems thinker. So I would say it's more like an attitude towards life. So that's how I would say it's that relevant for design.
Thank you. Hopefully that will answer the question. There was another one. Let me see if I understand it correctly. So it asks, how do we isolate and differentiate between cognitive biases from systems thinking? Not sure what exactly the question means, but I think that sort of it relates down to our cognitive biases and the systems that sort of live in, how they are connected, I'm hoping.
Yeah, well, cognitive biases are part of our assumptions, or the mechanisms that generate our assumptions. So, well, in systems thinking, like I said, we start looking at our assumptions and we understand what type of patterns of behavior are emerging out of those assumptions. So if you say, world is a dangerous place, if that is your operating assumption, right, towards the world out there, then there will be some patterns of behavior that emerge out of that assumption. So cognitive biases that exist are all parts of, let's say, mechanisms that weave together these assumptions that we have. So it's part of our worldviews, part of our mental models. So cognitive biases per se, in my opinion, are not that exciting. They become very exciting. The knowledge of them becomes very exciting when we can trace them in the instances of behavior of individuals. So, okay, that behavior is coming from that bias that exists there. And when you show this, when you show the relationship between something which is very subtle, these biases are very subtle and tacit, they are hiding at the depths of our basically mental models or assumptions, we cannot easily uncover them. But once we can connect the thread or run a thread through our basically through our assumptions to our ideas, or basically our actions or instances of behavior, then they lose their power. So a way of dissolving these cognitive biases or correcting them is not attacking them directly, is showing what type of behavior comes out of that bias. So I would say, if you want to start refining those cognitive biases, what one needs to do is basically put together what behavior comes out of which bias. And when this connection is made, there will be an awareness. This will be exposed to light. And this exposure to light is almost all we can do about correcting those cognitive biases. Because if you want to attack them directly, they're going to fight back, right? And they're going to appear in other areas, you know? So what we need to do is to create this connection. So once the connection is there, the bias is going to lose its power by the passing of time.
Thank you. There's a number of questions, but I really like this one, and it got some upvotes as well, so I'm not alone. How do you balance the organizational needs, requirements, versus really exploring what could be or what's ideal to solve a problem? So it's basically like, solving the right, there's for designers, and you've challenged a lot of things that I think designers, hold as a mantra. Yeah. We solve problems, we analyze things. And then you're pointing out the other side. And I think this one as well, there's this mantra in UX design and design in general of design the right thing and design the thing right. Yes, but design the right thing from whose perspective? Mm-hmm. And I think that this question goes into that. Like, is it if the organization's need or the organization's requirement on what you should be designing doesn't match with what you think the ideal should be to solve the problem?
Very good question. Very good question. So I would say, let's say we have a symptomatic problem solving or solving a symptomatic problem that is appearing, right? we can talk about it in our individual lives as well. Imagine I have stress, right? Stress is a symptom, is a problem symptom. I can fight the stress by various means. I can take pills, I can drink, or no matter what, I can do shopping, or so on and so forth. So this is a way of somehow reducing the level of stress as a symptomatic way, right, of dealing with this. But then there is dissolving this, which is understanding where this stress comes from and basically dealing with that source rather than the effect. So that is dissolving of the stress problem. And well, now what is the right balance? What do I do? So the best way to do this, the best way to look at this is that you can deal with the symptoms as long as they do not hamper or impede your ability to develop the fundamental solution. Because imagine if you're treating the symptom all the time, only. If you're only attacking the symptom, this symptom is going to get stronger and stronger, build some resistance and so on and so forth. And then by the passing of time, you will lose your ability to invest in and to develop the fundamental solution. So I would say in a company, if whenever they have a problem, they bring in a consultant from outside to solve the problem, this will impact the self-esteem of the personnel. Or the long run, they cannot deal with the problems individually anymore. If an individual drinks whenever he's stressed, he needs to increase the level of drinking as basically the symptom also becomes stronger and builds some resistance towards that. But then this may impede the fundamental solution, which is doing inner work, socializing with others, doing sports, because that drinking may result in some unintended consequences like getting sick, your immunity level coming down, and so on and so forth. So as long as it does not impede the fundamental, the creation and putting into place of the fundamental solution, you can go ahead with problem solving. But problem solving per se, over a long period of time, may somehow impede the ability that we can have for generating something which is fundamental and more profound, which is dissolving the problem.
There's a question to which, if you'll allow, Arash, I'll drop in an answer that I heard from you earlier. And the question is, how do you integrate user research and systems thinking? And in one of your earlier talks, you were mentioning the 5 whys and how very often the 5 whys stay at a symptomatic level. So just instead of just asking why all the time and expecting that you'll get to the real bottom of things, try to steer those questions more into getting to this mindset that brings that is the real birthplace of those problems.
Yeah, and the test is when you ask the question, it becomes uncomfortable. Something you don't want to respond. If you ask a couple of whys and you can ask 5 whys, no one gets disturbed or impacted by that, then you're not doing it correctly. So starting from the 3rd why, there should be some discomfort coming up. You're getting close. That shows that you're getting close to something which is problematic, which is deep, and which you identify with. Because one thing I forgot to say, the reason why these assumptions or worldviews that we have are difficult to change is that we identify with them. The I that we attribute to ourselves is somehow basically the sum of assumptions that we have. So if they are challenged, it's as if our identity is challenged. So when you get close to those things, there will be a bit of discomfort happening. So that's the right way of doing it. If you want to do the 5 whys, you see, well, there has to be an increasing level of discomfort as you're walking through the questions.
And I'll close with 2 questions that are really practical. One asks around some examples of tools or methods that are used in systems thinking, and another one that asks for book recommendations. So just put those 2 together.
Yeah, I would say tools. Well, stay away from any template. That's the first thing. Instead of which tools to use, I would tell you which tools not to use. The tools that you use should be, in systems thinking, for instance, we have causal loop diagramming. It's a very powerful technique. So it's not a tool, it's a technique for building representation of systems. We have stocks and flows maps, very powerful technique, but you need to invest time into learning the mechanics of these and to wrestle with them is not something that you can pick up and use in 5 minutes. So it needs a lot of investment in time and in enthusiasm, and not getting frustrated if you cannot use them off the mark. So I would say go for tools and techniques that will help you in conceptualizing a situation, not tools and techniques that have already conceptualized a situation and you're already dealing with a number of predefined concepts and predefined elements and ideas. Most of what exists, unfortunately, fits that category. The act of conceptualizing a system, looking at an aspect of reality, translating it into a set of constructs in your model. That is the task of modeler, developing models. And these models should reflect, acknowledge, and respect the uniqueness of every design situation. So it's not something off the shelf you can grab and apply to no matter what. You need to be able to use a tool that can allow you to see the nuances that situation generates. So go for techniques that give you tools for conceptualizing a situation, for looking at it and translating it into a number of interconnected concepts to work with, and then see what you can achieve with that model. Go back again to reality, reconceptualize, come back, repeat this sense-making process. Probably you've heard a lot about sense-making. Sense-making is an act of building models, testing those models, trying to see what insights can come out of those models. Based on that, repeating this cycle again. So basically, this is what I would say in response to what tools and techniques. Books, like I said, stay away from books that have the design or systems in their title. Read, because this is a context neutral field. This is not a discipline. Design is not a discipline on its own. It's an intersection between various disciplines. So when you make a discipline out of it, then it loses its richness. Look at Japanese gardening. Look at game development to see what you can learn from designing from that part. Look at poetry. Look at novels, how a novel is written. Look at those fundamental work of literature. Look at those and extract elements of design yourself. Don't expect to be spoon-fed with these principles and ideas. Go and extract them yourselves. Look at anything that is timeless, anything that comes from decades ago and is still valid. They offer you a lot of good principles and ideas for designing and creating something which is timeless as well. Yeah.
Beautifully put. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love that.
I think this is a good point to end.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
great.
That's why.
To answer the next question as good as I did this one. So I think that's a good ending, I would say.
Yeah, that's why.
No, we need to play Beethoven's Ninth Symphony on the exit. As you go
Absolutely.
out. Here we go.
Yeah.
And so yes, this is why also I picked something that is there was a very specific question because I wanted to, after all the sort of higher level talk, to bring it down to something that is very very specific and something that the audience can take away. So with that, I'm looking for Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in the meantime.
Yeah.
Arash, thank you very much.
Very much. I hope I can see you in the program and design result in some course, in some groups, and we can learn together and experience those emergencies. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Arash.
Keep
Thank
safe,
you.
have fun, keep on learning.
Thank you very much.
Event.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Talk later. Bye.